Hey guys, tonight we sidle through a damp, torch-lit alley whose slick cobblestones glimmer with every flicker of flame. And you probably won't survive this harebrained notion of playing assassin on medieval turf. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so I know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, heart fluttering, as the torch in your hand sputters, casting jittery shadows against stone walls that seem to lean in just to eavesdrop on your every breath. In most towns, street lighting didn't arrive until the late 14th century, so you got only your wits and a dripping torch to guide you. Good luck with that mainstream fact echoing in your head. Historians still argue whether narrow alleys were ever the preferred route for professional killers or simply the nemesis of innocent drunks. And by the way, some secretive blades for hire swore by crocodile dung sunscreen to keep their skin from burning under relentless torches. Quirky, yes, but who wants a sunburn when you're skulking? A cold breeze snakes between the buildings carrying the sour tang of refuse and the occasional cough from a sickly beggar sheltering in a doorway. The air feels thicker than your Wi-Fi signal at peak hour. Every footfall echoes, reminding you how much louder creaking leather armor is compared to your perfectly silent AirPods' modern asides for an ancient problem. You force yourself into a slow, calculated pace, but those cobblestones are uneven, and you catch a toe in a gap. If you thought your living room floor creaked, wait until centuries-old stones betray you with an audible clash. Torchlight dances off puddles of stagnant water. The glint looks like dragon's eye, only it's probably just a rat. Try not to trip over that suspicious rodent unless you fancy being lunch for vermin, more ruthless than any rival assassin. Flicking your gaze up, you spot shuttered windows and a single unlocked door half ajar promising ingress, or a hidden pivot for a guard to spring out. Patience, friend, patience. That door might squeal like your old car's brakes if you push it. Lichen creeps across the wall, a living tapestry that wavers between eerie art and mild mildew. You remind yourself that medieval streets were breeding grounds for disease. Estimate 1 in 3 city dwellers died before reaching age 25. Medicine was rudimentary. Forget Band-Aids. Bloodletting and leeches were all the rage. Historians still argue whether leech therapy actually helped or just made everyone squeamish. Suddenly, you hear distant laughter and clinking tankards from a tavern round the corner. Gossip flows more freely than ale. In these dens whisper a name, and the rumor mill churns. Betrayal often started with over-enthusiastic bar talk. Your breath hitches no guard uniforms, but a blade glints behind a mug. Your cover's in jeopardy. Time to slip into shadow again, but shadows here are as thick as that stew you had for dinner, minus any vegetables. Water drips from a low eave, plopping into a puddle with a rhythm almost musical if your nerves weren't shot. You pause, letting your senses swim in the dripping cadence, nearly dozing off, until a stray cat darts out yowling like a banshee at midnight. Nice try, fuzzball. This is no time for nap breaks. At the alley's dead end, you press your back against the cold stone chest heaving. Ahead, an iron gate bars your path, each wrought iron bar promising a cage. Guards rotate every hour on the dot. Missing that narrow window means reset, retrace, and repeat in a game where patience punishes more than brute force. Your heart pounds louder than any medieval war horn, and you realize if surviving a week as a medieval assassin were easy, everyone would do it. Spoiler alert, they didn't. You press your palms against the cold stone wall and close your eyes, tasting the iron tang of sweat that's pooled in the small of your back. Your muscles scream in unison, a choir of agony that's remixed by every step you took in the last hour. In medieval orders, aspiring knights who doubled as occasional assassins often began training as squires by age 7 and practiced all day, every day until they bled or begged for mercy. You, on the other hand, decided to wing it with an evening YouTube workout and now wonder why your lungs feel like someone stuffed them with gravel. Historians still argue whether these early age routines actually forged better fighters or just produced cranky adults who couldn't tie their own shoelaces. Your instructor, if you can call the rusty sword you found tossed behind the outhouse, an instructor has a peculiar teaching style. You've watched more how-to tutorials than a late-night TikToker, yet those pixelated sword swings can't compare to the hefty steel in your grip. It weighs more than your grandpa's ancient TV set, and every time you raise it, your arms buckle like wet noodles. Some medieval masters like to affix leather straps weighted with sandbags to your wrists and ankles, claiming it built true iron endurance quirky. Yes, but also a recipe for tripping, face first into the mud. You pull yourself into a mock crouch and crouch again face inches from a puddle, reflecting your own strained expression. The water ripples, distorting your grimace into something resembling medieval abstract art. A voice in your head suggests downloading a fitness tracker to shame you for missing steps, but technology won't save you here. Your feet sink into the muck with each squat. The squelch echoes like a wet kiss. This isn't 21st century CrossFit where you high-five strangers and Instagram your bruises. No, this is primal raw exhaustion where blisters grow faster than conspiracy theories on the internet. Your legs tremble as you attempt a wall climb just 5 feet high, nothing your average home gym wouldn't mock. You press your back to the ivy-covered stone arms, shaking as you lift. The rough texture scrapes your shirt, and you imagine the tiny medieval dust bunnies throwing a welcome party under your chin. If you thought your living room carpet was clingy, try wrestling with moss that smells like a damp sock abandoned for a fortnight. Summoning every last drop of willpower, you heave yourself up. One foot slips on a patch of lichen, and you dangle heart-thundering, praying the ivy holds. Modern gyms have padded floors and spotters. Here, the only safety net is a sopping wet pile of leaves that'll probably harbor a nest of angry ticks. If ticks had tiny battle axes, you'd be in trouble. After a moment that feels like an eternity, you swing one leg over the top and collapse under the flat roof ledge. You lie there panting the night air, brushing your cheeks like a gentle lullaby until you remember the guard tower just 20 yards away. Focusing on breathing becomes an Olympic sport. Inhale, exhale, Inhale. The sweet smell of exhaustion mingles with the tang of mildew, and you quietly congratulate yourself for not passing out. Your makeshift instructor then orders push-ups, 100 of them, for core strength, they say. You drop face-first, fingers slipping on the uneven stone. Each push-up is a punishment and a lesson real assassins had to be as stealthy as cats, yet strong enough to hoist armor and carry bodies without crying for a sugar packet. You force your arms up chest, cracking, sweat pooling in your ears. Remember that creaking leather armor from Section 1. It now feels like a soothing memory compared to the wet slap of your shirt against the ground. After 50 push-ups, you pause on your knees, head bowed, willing your heart to slow. The night is alive with distant hooves, a dog barking in the distance, and the faint clink of a guard changing shift. This relentless training regimen would break most novices in a fortnight, but a true medieval killer was expected to endure fatigue so deep it felt like drowning in porridge. Lunchtime porridge, you sigh, but there are no kitchen breaks here. As you stumble to your feet, you spot a discarded training dummy, a rough wooden figure riddled with gashes from novice blades. Runes scratched into its surface glitter in moonlight, an odd fringe detail perhaps copied from Norse mercenaries who believed invoking runic blessings granted victory. You heft your sword again and swing slicing through air, an old doll face alike, splinters dancing like confetti. The impact sends a jolt through your shoulder, and you mutter that you should have gone to physical therapy instead of medieval assassin prep. Tonight's workout would impress a medieval blacksmith who arguably had more muscle from endless hammering than you'll gain with all the push-ups in Christendom. But the real rub is mental fatigue. After 3 hours of grinding drills, your brain is as foggy as a monastery at dawn. In those cloistered halls, novices chanted psalms before sunrise, combining prayer with strength training to steel mind and body. You, however, can't even chant row, row, row your boat without skipping a word. Historians still argue whether chanting improved focus or just gave monks sore throats. Your vision blurs as you stagger to a nearby barrel and gulp down tepid water. It tastes like something metal scraped across a stone, refreshing in a way that a flat soda never could be. You swallow carefully, mindful of coughing and spitting out half the liquid. Meanwhile, the old wooden barrel creaks ominously as if saying, "You'll never last a week." On unsteady legs, you shuffle toward a low roof beam for balance. This narrow plank doubles as your partner for spear-throwing drills. Instructors used to attach straw targets to the far wall, claiming no distraction was too trivial. Some masters even released live pigeons mid-drill for advanced students' quirky yes, but hardly a bird lover's delight. Dodging flapping wings while aiming a spear might make for an epic tick-tock clip, but it doesn't end well for you or the pigeon. You lob the spear with a grunt. It thuds into the wall a foot from its mark, startling a sleeping cat that screeches and scatters. Guess the cat's medieval ancestor got its revenge. The ground vibrates with every miss, each thud a reminder that precision only comes with rest, and you have none. Finally, your instructor, imaginary or not, calls an end to the session. Your legs feel like wet spaghetti, your arms like overcooked noodles, and your entire being craves a mattress that doesn't resemble a stone slab. You slide down the wall in defeat, back against the cold, and allow the night's hush to wrap around you. As you drift toward oblivion, you realize the brutal truth, relentless training, and fatigue weren't just hurdles. They were the invisible shackles that snuffed out most would-be assassins before they even drew blood. You probably won't survive the second day, let alone a week. You hoist your sword and armor from the wagon's wagonette, because even medieval assassins had to borrow gear and immediately feel like you're wrestling a caffeinated mule. Most arming swords weighed around 1.1 kilos, 2.4 elf lus, while a full hauberk of chainmail could stack on another 15-20 kilos across your shoulders and torso. That's before you strap on bucklers, daggers, and pouches bulging with chalk cord and questionable herbal mixtures. You thought lugging a laptop case was a workout. Try hauling enough steel to qualify as a small armory. Historians still argue whether lighter padded gambesons offered more stealth than full metal, so you get to debate fashion while gasping for breath. Every step you take is announced by a symphony of clinks, clanks, and ominous rattles. Remember that creaking leather armor from Section 1. It's back only now, accompanied by the metallic jingle of belt rings and the gentle tink of your sword against its scabbard. You try to whisper shuffle forward, but the sound carries like a cymbal crash in an empty cathedral. The night watch won't need fancy listening devices. Your gear is a built-in alarm system. You kick yourself mentally for replacing those custom-fit boots with off-the-rack hobnailed ones. They're less silent step and more march of the centipedes. In a desperate bid for stealth, you flatten out scraps of sheepskin to line your soles, an odd but historically attested trick some alleged medieval cutthroats used to mute their footfalls. Fringe whispers even suggest boar bristle padding, tucked inside greaves to muffle clanking chainmail links. You press forward, half expecting to feel pig bristles tickle your ankles. Historians still argue whether these noise-dampening hacks actually kept assassins under the radar or simply made them smell like a butcher's back porch. Your belt of throwing knives dances around your waist like eager children at a puppet show. Each knife clatters when you breathe too deeply. You take a deep breath to steady yourself, mistake blade on metal percussion, and you swat your hip, cursing both your coordination and your decision to wear 3 different metals at once. Modern ASMR channels would kill for this level of immersive audio detail, but you just want to die quietly. The chainmail hauberk shifts irritatingly as you crouch behind a low wall. Every inch of movement sends links grinding together, rough as a cheese grater on your skin. You wish for a shimmy of Velcro, or even a discreet zipper, anything but this medieval Rube Goldberg contraption. A cold night breeze sneaks under your coif and carries the damp scent of straw from the nearby barn. You wonder if straw clumps might be quieter underfoot than chainmail, but ditching your core defense seems like a bad idea. You attempt a silent pivot to peer around a corner, only to trigger a chorus of groans from rusty hinges on your vambrace. That high-pitched squeal sounds suspiciously like a tea kettle on boil, which might be charming in a cozy kitchen, but is deeply counterproductive when skulking toward a lord's private chambers. You wince curse softly, then freeze, hoping the echo dies before it rouses a patrol. Modern noise-canceling headphones could learn a thing or two from medieval carpenters. Swatting a mosquito from your helmet, you remember a fringe tale about assassins smearing chimney soot on their faces to blend into moonlit rafters. You rub a smudge onto your cheek, immediately regretting the eye-stinging residue. Chimney soot might have darkened your skin, but it also clogged your nostrils and tasted like burnt marshmallow gone horribly wrong. Historians still argue whether soot served as camouflage or just turned everyone into unwitting coal miners. Despite your creative hacks, stealth is slipping away with each step. You feel every weighted pouch thud against your hip like a reluctant drummer in a parade. Your sword scabbard swings out on its straps, clocking your thigh with a dull thwack. If you'd known this was going to be the acoustic highlight of your night, you'd have invested in earplugs, though finding medieval wax plugs might be tougher than learning Latin. A cat crosses your path, arches its back at the racket, then slinks off as if to say, "Do better." Finally, you consider abandoning half your gear to move more quietly. But a daggerless assassin is just a loud civilian with a bad attitude. You grip the hilt of your sword, its weight a cruel reminder that style and stealth were seldom synonymous in the Middle Ages. Even the most skilled blades for hire risked giving themselves away with every necessary piece of equipment. If surviving a week meant sacrificing your entire arsenal, you'd have to concede defeat on day one. Your heartbeat races with the realization that every metal strap, every buckle joint, and every rattling chain is conspiring against your shadowy aspirations. You trudge onward, noises echoing like an unwanted fanfare, and concede that silence has never been your friend. You probably won't survive tonight's excursion, let alone last a week. You press your back into the cool stone of the gatehouse heart, still rattling from the clank of your own gear, and you realize the night's biggest obstacle isn't the darkness, it's the ever-watchful eyes and iron bars standing between you and your mark. In the 13th century, many European towns employed between 12 and 20 men-at-arms to guard the main gates, rotating shifts every 2 hours to stave off exhaustion and complacency. You check your makeshift timepiece, a cracked sundial you scavenged, and wonder if you've already missed your window by a full rotation. Historians still argue whether gate rotations were strictly timed or adjusted on the fly according to threats. But either theory spells trouble for you. Step 1. Study the patrol paths. Guards tend to march predictable loops up along the battlements, down to the barbican, then around the outer wall before looping back. You crouch low, counting the soft tread of hobnailed boots echoing against flagstones. Each boot step registers like a drum beat in your chest. You remind yourself of that noisy chainmail from yesterday. Tonight, every metal link you carry is practically a spotlight in a theater of shadows. Between the gates, you spot a narrow sentry post with a slit window just big enough to slip a hand through. On closer inspection, you see a makeshift hooded lantern coal oil bubbling inside a metal grate, casting enough light for a guard to read quietly by candle. A mainstream fact, kerosene lamps didn't arrive until centuries later, which means these men worked with open flame or tallow candles fire hazards in their own right. You imagine the smell of burning fat mixing with the damp moss on these walls like someone tried to caramelize a swamp. You glance up at the heavy oak portcullis, its beams reinforced by iron hoops and lifted by a rope and pulley system within a narrow chamber. Pulling those long-sparked gates up required at least 4 burly guards on the lever bars, and they usually kept that mechanism under lock and key, literally. Medieval locksmiths crafted wards so complex that some keys had teeth shaped like tiny crosses or crescents. Quirky, perhaps, but it meant you couldn't just pick the lock with a bobby pin. You sigh your only bobby pin is still tangled in your hair from that chimney soot camouflage experiment. Listening still, you hear distant laughter from the inner courtyard as a patrol changes guard. When they slip inside, the main gate closes with a groaning thud, the portcullis descending in perfect sync. You press your forehead against the stone to feel its vibration, a reminder that once those jaws close, you've got minutes, maybe seconds to squeeze through before the bar drops. If you fail, your only option is to climb. Climbing a gate tower, though, usually triggers dozens of arrow slits trained on every possible approach. Your gaze flicks to a narrow side postern gate often used to let trusted merchants slip in after hours. You recall reading that some castles even hid these small doors behind bales of hay or false flagstones, yet sturdy iron bands kept them from swinging freely. Historians still argue whether postern gates were more common in frontier castles or wealthy urban keeps, but they agree on one thing: those doors were guarded just as fiercely as the main shafts. It's like deciding between a locked vault or a heavily guarded safe. Neither is your friend. You adjust your footing and edge along the wall toward a concealed drainage channel just wide enough for you to fit if you stoop low. It's a risky gambit and smells like old cheese and mildew, but at least it bypasses the gatehouse entirely. You inch forward, chain mail shifting and clinking so loudly, you're sure a nearby guard might think it's a baby dragon breathing in smoke. You wince and pat your chest, whispering, "Relax. It'll be over soon." Suddenly, the hush is broken by an unexpected bleat. A goat, or maybe a sheep, stands in the courtyard tethered near the guard's fire. Medieval farmers sometimes traded their animals to castle garrisons in exchange for protection, and the livestock doubled as both food stock and early warning system. Any predator or trespasser would spook the herd and alert the guards. Quirky? Yes, but effective. You freeze as the goat stamps a hoof, raising its muzzle toward the water channel, where you lie sprawled. Inhale, exhale, you're the same shade of gray as the stones, so maybe it won't see you. The goat relaxes and returns to chewing. Your relief is so intense you nearly cough up that bit of tallow you tasted earlier. Back to business, you slither forward, mindful of the drip-drip rhythm of a leaky gutter overhead. Legend has it, some sentries would create fake leaks to train recruits in silent stepping, but nobody knows if that was genius or just another medieval prank. Historians still argue whether such drills improved guard acuity or just led to soggy uniforms. You reach the far end of the drain, where the narrow postern gate stands locked with a hefty iron bar that slides into the adjacent wall hinge. There's no keyhole to pick, only a latched bar you must lift. You brace yourself, palms on the cold metal, and exert every ounce of strength. The bar yields with a loud metallic clang, perfectly timed to echo through the courtyard like a dinner gong. You freeze as footsteps approach. Two guards converge at the postern lantern light bobbing above their helmets. They pause mid-step, staring at the open gate with confusion. One murmurs to the other, "Didn't we lock that last watch?" The other shrugs. You press your body flat against the stone heart, thundering. Remember that training in Section 2 about heart control. You manage a single shuddered breath. The guards exchange a glance. One steps toward the bar and slides it back with a grunt. They push the gate closed and pad away, confident again in their lock's immunity, completely unaware you stand inches behind them. You let them pass, then exhale so quietly it dissolves into the damp night air. You slide the bar back out quieter, this time thanks to a strip of cloth you tucked underneath as a makeshift buffer. That historic tidbit about locksmiths carving keys in shapes of crosses now seems less intimidating when you realize brute force and cunning sometimes beat craftsmanship. Historians still argue whether early locksmith guilds tightened security or simply sparked an arms race of breaking and fixing locks. Through the gate, you find yourself in a narrow alley between the inner and outer walls. Here the guards' patrols are tighter, 2 man-at-arms per 30 feet, spear shafts glinting in moonlight. The spears aren't just decorative. Common pole arms of the era extended a soldier's reach to over 6 feet, creating an instant tripwire for anyone foolish enough to try a break and enter. You pause and remember your own spear-throwing fiasco from Section 2, Dear Pigeon's memory, still haunting you. Stepping lightly, you follow the fence line to a low window into the Lord's private quarters. It's barred with iron grills, spaced just far enough for you to squeeze an arm through and test the latch inside. You reach in and fumble for the latch, a simple thumb flip. It clicks open. Your chest tightens. A mainstream fact is that many wealthy residences use simple latches inside once the door was unlocked from outside to prevent servants from sneaking in. Last line of defense indeed. The window swings in silently, and you pivot inside like a poorly executed ballet, praying the latch holds. Inside the corridor is lit by flickering wall sconces, the heat of which makes sweat bead on your brow. One more obstacle, down countless more ahead yet. You can't help a small grin. You've beaten at least the first layer of defenses. But as you clear the sill, you swear you hear the faintest echo of a goat's bleat behind you. Security here is more than locks. It's the sum of every living creature on patrol. You remind yourself that medieval security wasn't perfect, but it was designed for defenders, not intruders. And you, my friend, are very much the intruder. You slip further into the dimly lit corridor, heart still pounding from that goat's bleat echoing behind you, and a sudden spray of pain jars you. You glance down, a jagged iron splinter from the window grill has pierced your palm. Blood wells up warm and vivid, painting your fingertips a startling scarlet. You taste copper on your tongue and realize there is no moment like a crisis to remind you that medieval assassins carried neither band-aids nor ibuprofen. In medieval Europe, surgeons didn't grasp germ theory, and had no concept of anesthesia until the 19th century, meaning every cut, every saw, every cauterization was endured fully awake. Mainstream fact. You press a sleeve to your wound, but the coarse wool only irritates the raw skin, shredding threads and leaving fiber lint embedded in the cut. You grit your teeth as rivulets of blood drip onto the flagstones, sizzling faintly in the candlelight, or maybe that's just your imagination turning stress into auditory hallucinations. You pant softly, leaning against the wall, and recall a quirky remedy whispered in taverns applying fresh spiderwebs to wounds to staunch bleeding and keep out flies. Supposedly, the stick is silk held magical antiseptic powers, though honestly, it likely just trapped dirt and made your arm itch like crazy. Historians still argue whether such fringe techniques genuinely aided healing or simply invited an army of creepy, crawly squatters to move in. Your breathing grows shallow as the adrenaline ebbs and the sharp edge of pain blossoms into a throbbing ache. You remember that in many towns, barber surgeons doubled as dentists and butchers, so if you survived the initial cut, you were guaranteed a gruesome DIY treatment that involved wine-soaked cloths and crude bone saws. You press your hand to your mouth to stifle a whimper. Fresh wine tastes like a flat cola left out in the sun, but at least its acidity provided a rudimentary disinfectant. Dragging yourself forward, you balance one-handed, the other clamped tightly to your palm. A stray torch flickers above as you pass, casting dancing shadows that seem to wink at your inability to perform basic self-care. No sterile gauze here, just onion poultices and dung. A particularly bizarre medieval concoction involved smearing cow dung on wounds under the belief that its heat-retaining properties sped clotting. You shudder imagining barnyard odors mingling with your own. Despite the stench, you have to choose, abandon the mission or forge ahead with a wound that's likely to fester. You steady yourself and steal a glance at your leather jerkin, now speckled with dark stains. You sniff. It smells faintly of mold and regret. You remember your gym bag back home, filled with microfiber towels and antiseptic wipes, suddenly worth a small fortune. As you inch toward the private chamber door, each step sends a jolt of pain through your hand. Spasms ripple up your arm, and you wonder if you'll survive the hour, let alone the week. Infection set in fast without proper cleaning, gangrene could claim a lemon days, and sepsis claimed entire lives. Some records suggest that up to half of all amputations ended fatally grim odds for a would-be assassin. You pause beneath a tapestry depicting a saint slaying a dragon. The saint's armor gleams. Your own chainmail clinks softly as you shift. You attempt to rip a thread from the tapestry to bind your hand, but your fingers fumble. Runes embroidered into the fabric glitter in the torchlight, a fringed detail some monks claimed offered protective blessings. You tear off a fragment, wrap it around your palm, and hope the saint's luck rubs off on you. Historians still argue whether those runic blessings had any real psychological effect or were just pious decor. Your breath hitches as the wound throbs. You notice the tapestry's colors, vibrant reds and golds dulled by centuries of candle soot. You think about how a modern hospital room would seem like paradise crisp linens, fluorescent lights, and nurses who didn't wield bone-curing knives. But you're here in a centuries-old scullery of medicine where the best you can hope for is a leech. Yes, leech therapy was popular. Tiny bloodsuckers applied to wounds to draw out bad humors. Somehow, letting slimy worms feast on your blood seemed more sanitary than cow dung. Your fingers tremble as you approach a heavy oak door. You press your wounded hand against the cool metal, each pulse of pain reminding you that you're nowhere near safe. A muffled cough drifts from the other side. Inside waits your target, or at least the chamber leading to him, and you realize every minute here is a minute closer to collapsing from shock or infection. Drawing a deep breath, you push the door open with your good hand. The hinges groan in protest like a disgruntled innkeeper forced to host unwanted guests. You slip inside, heart rattling, as the door creaks shut behind you. The room's air is warmer scented with perfumed oils and the tang of aged wood. You spot an ornate basin filled with water, likely meant for ritual hand-washing by the Lord Steward. With trembling fingers, you scoop a handful of water and splash it onto your wound. The cold liquid sends a fresh wave of pain shooting up your arm, but you grit your teeth and hold steady. You remember reading that not every medieval household had clean water. Well springs often harbored bacteria, turning this gesture into a roll of the dice. Settling atop a carved chair, you wrap the tapestry fragment tighter, pressing it firmly to staunch the bleeding. Your pulse throbs in your wrist, and sweat beads at your hairline despite the chill of the stone walls. You try to calm your racing thoughts, envision that fan hum from home, the soft breeze against your face. It helps momentarily until your hand goes numb and the darkness tightens at the edges of your vision. Just breathe, you whisper, recalling the heart-controlled drills from training sessions long ago. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. But the pain and the fear swirl together like venom in your veins, and you wonder if your chosen career path was less shadowy intrigue and more DIY torture. You swallow hard, tasting the tang of iron again, and fight the urge to drop to your knees. Up ahead, you see the door to the Lord's private chamber, your endgame. But first you have to deal with this wound. You eye a small table holding writing implements, ink pots, quills, and rolls of parchment. A quill might make a decent splint if you broke a bone, but your palm isn't snapped, it's sliced. You could try to suture it with the quill's shaft and thread, but without sterilization, you'd be stitching infection directly into your flesh. Summoning resolve, you wipe your hands on your jerkin sacrilege, perhaps, but necessary. You leave behind a crimson smear as you advance toward the Lord's chamber. The wound is throbbing so fiercely, it's a miracle you can focus. You tell yourself that adrenaline will carry you through, but every step is a gamble. One wrong move, one missed heartbeat, and you could black out for good. Yet, here you are, lurching forward through the warm glow of candlelight, clutching a bleeding hand and holding on to hope that your improvised bandage holds, that you can finish what you started, and that infection can wait another hour. In medieval times, the line between life and death was often a matter of tending to wounds quickly. You contemplate that modern first aid kit back home, complete with antiseptic wipe and gauze and sigh. If only you had it now. Your vision blurs as you step into the threshold of the chamber. The tapestry on the wall flutters lightly in the draft, as though urging you on. You wipe a drop of blood from your brow and steel yourself for what's next. Because if you survive the next few moments, you'll need more than makeshift bandages to last a week as a medieval assassin. You step over the threshold of the Lord's private chamber, every nerve pulsing from your wounded hand, and the first thing that hits you is the scent of roses and something earthier, like a pile of fresh mushrooms left too long in the cellar. It's the aroma of poison at work. Medieval assassins often favored toxins over steel. Arsenic was known as inheritance powder by the 16th century, earning its nickname because it discreetly secured fortunes for heirs mainstream fact. Tonight, you're no heir. You're the unfortunate taster of your own cunning. Your target reclines on a velvet divan, lifting a goblet to ruby lips framed by a neatly trimmed beard. The wine glimmers in the candlelight, promising warmth and oblivion. You've studied poison manuals, well-scribbled notes passed among shady apothecaries, but theory rarely matches reality. One slip of a vial, one extra pinch of powdered wolfsbane, and you could be the next body on the floor. Historians still argue whether deliberate arsenic poisoning truly skyrocketed during plague years, or if mad apothecaries just got blamed for every sudden death. You edge closer, every gear clink from your armor hammering in your ears. Reflexively, you brush aside a gilded goblet and grab the pewter tankard at your feet. Even pewter could leach lead into liquids. Another curious tidbit whispered in alchemical circles, quirky. You recall that lead poisoning symptoms mimic mercury delirium. So if your target keels over twitching like a marionette, no one will suspect foul play, just divine judgment. With a trembling hand, you palm a small vial of powdered nightshade, its cork sealed with wax. Legend says medieval poisoners believed unicorn horn powder, actually ground narwhal tusk, could act as a universal antidote. Fringe tidbit. You tuck a pinch of that mythical dust into your palm for late-stage emergencies, even though it probably does nothing except raise your alchemy cred. Historians still argue whether unicorn horn was ever effective or simply a marketing ploy by mercantile charlatans. Your lips dry as you approach, and you remind yourself that poisoning isn't always subtle. Symptoms of hemlock appear within minutes: rapid paralysis, trembling limbs, the sensation of being wrapped in invisible ice. Henbane induces delirium and hallucinations, useful if you want your mark to wander screaming into the courtyard. You crack the vial and drop a sliver of white dust into his wine. The crystalline particles settle slowly, catching flame light like tiny stars sinking into a black pond. A distant owl hoots through a window crack, and you freeze. Time dilates. You're part of a centuries-old club of conspirators, but you feel anything but clandestine. Your chest tightens, and you fight back a coughing fit that's been creeping up. The dust you handled has peppered your fingers, and now minuscule motes drift into your lungs. You inhale sharply, realizing you may have just dosed yourself. If that's not poetic justice, you don't know what is. Your target raises the goblet in your direction. "My thanks," he intones, voice velvety. He sips. You watch his throat swallow the wine in slow motion. A bead of crimson drips onto his lips. Perhaps just wine, you tell yourself, despite the growing sense of dread in your gut. Minutes stretch into a tightrope walk between triumph and tragedy. His eyes flutter first a subtle wince, then a tremor in his hand. He places the goblet on a nearby table with a soft clink. You press your palm to your mouth, feeling a hot prickle of nerves. If you'd smeared enough plant toxin on his chalice rim, he'd twitch within seconds. Visceral proof of your handiwork. Yet the wine looked untouched by soot, no residue on the rim save for a faint dusting. He stands abruptly, knocking the table over. The crash rings in the chamber like a cannon shot. You lunge to steady an ornate candelabrum, half expecting a fireball, half pleased you didn't trip over your own feet. You whisper a quick apology to the flickering candles as if they cared. The Lord staggers toward you, gait unsteady. His face pales, eyes glossing over. He sways, gripping the back of a chair. A bead of sweat drips from his brow, salted sweet like tears. You step forward, intent on delivering the final push, a hidden dagger to the throat, but your vision blurs. That stray nightshade dust in your lungs is working faster than expected. You blink, trying to focus. He lunges past you toward a tapestry, pressing his fingers into the wool to steady himself. The room tilts, floorboards creaking. Your heart pounds so fiercely you swear it's trying to break free of your chest. Pain blossoms as your poisoned palm throbs a second betrayal. He clamps a hand to his throat. Wheezing. Guard, he rasps. A distant shout echoes through the halls. You realize you have mere seconds to slip away before reinforcements arrive. You curse the clanking mail at your side and wish for slipper soft leather boots. Turning, you stagger toward the door, only to find it blocked by the bulging frame of a burly steward, eyes wide with panic. He wears no armor, just a heavy leather jerkin and a thick belt of keys jangling like gallows bells. His approach is deliberate. You freeze boots sliding on polished stone. The steward lifts a heavy cudgel, its wood splintered from sorcery-warding carvings. In medieval estates, stewards often doubled as security, and records show some carried mace-like flails for crowd control, proof that not every defender wore mail or held a spear, mainstream fact. You swallow hard, mouth-tasting dust and dread. Behind the steward, the Lord staggers out of his stupor, eyes burning with betrayal. His gaze hunts you like a falcon on a mole. You lurch sideways, dagger in hand, but your palm trembles so violently you nearly drop it. The steward swings the cudgel in a wide arc. You duck, but the blow still connects, jarred into your ribs with a crack you feel in your teeth. A jab of breath leaves you sensation passing like a wave. You taste iron and fear. The steward barks an order in a language you barely recognize, something guttural and forceful. The Lord's hand twitches toward a bell cord ready to summon more guards. You have one fleeting moment, one chance to escape this chamber of death you orchestrated. You dive for the open window. You enter, dagger slipping from your numb fingers as you scramble. The steward lunges, shining eyes locked on you. You fling yourself through the pane. The glass shards rain down like malevolent confetti. Snow-white curtains cling to you, tugging at your sleeves like clingy relatives. You hit the ground outside with a thud that reverberates up your spine. fingers clutching torn fabric, you scramble into the darkness. Behind you shouts, and the clatter of armor fill the corridor. Your lungs burn, each breath rasping as you fight toxins and adrenaline coursing together. You bolt into the night air hot throttling and taste freedom bitter fleeting. Every step echoes clanking chainmail and ragged gasps. Your ribs throb with each breath, and the wound in your palm blazes like a beacon. You dare not look back, but the distant glow of candles through the window is a reminder that death still hunts you. You stumble down the corridor, lungs heaving, and you realize poison might kill slowly, but panic kills faster. If you survive the toxins, you'll still have to outrun every guard in this fortress. And so, with vision blurring and strength ebbing, you sprint into the unknown, a fugitive in a world where one miscalculation spells doom. You might just make it past the courtyard, or you might collapse in the moat, a cautionary tale for future poisoners. Either way, you're weak as a medieval assassin is already teetering on the brink of disaster. You burst through the shattered window frame and emerge into a night sky, spitting icy raindrops that sting like miniature daggers against your cheeks. Your lungs heave each breath, mingling the acrid tang of smoke from the torched guardroom behind you with the sharp chill of the downpour. Medieval roads weren't the smooth asphalt of your daily commute. They were rutted, unpaved pathways lined with horse dung, open drains, and the occasional stray pig carcass in winter, all of which freeze into nuggets of slipperiness mainstream fact. You scramble forward, chainmail clanking like a bad ringtone, and immediately regret ever thinking a courtyard escape would feel like a breeze. The mud here is half ice, half peat, and fully determined to swallow your boots. Each step drags you down your foot, suctioning from the earth with a wet slurp that would make any ASMR enthusiast weak at the knees if they weren't busy recoiling in horror. You try to sprint, but the ground fights back, yanking you knee-deep in muck. Your lungs burn from exertion and the unforgiving air. The cold rain pools in the collar of your gambeson, trickling like a mocking coach, saying, "Nice try, champ." Historians still argue whether medieval armies halted campaigns entirely during winter months or simply trudged onward in spite of the cold. But either way, you're wishing you'd invested in thermal underwear. Some fringe accounts claim that desperate travelers once stuffed their boots with live frogs, believing the amphibian's body heat would stave off frostbite. You kick yourself for not bringing any frogs, but you're pretty sure frogs and chainmail don't mix well. Your breath fogs in front of you as you navigate around half-frozen puddles reflecting torchlight like broken mirrors. The air smells of damp straw and rotting leaves like a compost pile auditioning to be the world's worst perfume. A stray wind whips up, carrying the faint bark of a distant hound. Think of that dog as your personal overly judgmental fitness tracker. Step count low, mud resistance high. You glance back toward the fortress walls, their silhouette looming like a slumbering giant. Torches flicker in arrow slits, but none are trained on you yet. You steel yourself and trudge on the mud, sucking your feet as if the earth itself is trying to keep you as a souvenir. You vaguely remember that in some regions, spring thaw turned roads into quagmires so treacherous that merchants paid hefty tolls to use plank-lined causeways. No such luxury here, my friend. A sudden slip sends you sprawling face first into the muck. You lift a hand to catch yourself, only to plunge it wrist deep into cold sludge. The blood from your palm wound, remember Section 5, oozes into the mire, turning the gray-brown sludge into a crimson swirl. You suck in a breath at the icy shock shooting up your arm and grit your teeth. At least no one can accuse you of being too clean. You push yourself up, water streaming from your hair like a drenched cat betraying you with every shiver. Your armor's edges scrape against frozen earth, producing that same telltale tink-tink soundtrack, but now accented by chunks of ice falling off your metal plates. The jingle is so rhythmic, it might as well be a medieval ringtone. Too bad you can't set it to beep, beep, I'm a chainmail. Pressing onward, your teeth chatter in a way that sounds suspiciously like applause. The rain hammers your cloak, turning the heavy wool into something resembling a wet pancake draped over your shoulders. You ponder a modern life hack. Perhaps a Gore-Tex jacket would solve all these problems, but that's obviously centuries away. Instead, you tuck yourself into a hunched posture, trying to conserve body heat and dignity in equal measure. As you round a bend, your boot catches on a half-buried wooden cartwheel, and you teeter, nearly face-planting again. You right yourself at the last second, arms flailing like a novice mime. A lone lantern flickers on a rickety post, its feeble glow cutting through the rain like a cigarette butt in gale force winds. You approach it grateful for the dry circle of warmth it illuminates. That beam of light becomes your target, your personal slice of comfort in an otherwise hostile world. Under that lantern, you pause to catch your breath. Steam rises from your jacket as your body tries futilely to warm up. You dab at your wound with a strip of cloth from your jerkin, mindful of infection. The cold slows clotting, making blood flow longer than the credits of a sprawling fantasy epic. Some medieval herbalists recommended wrapping wounds with sorrel leaves, claiming the plant's salicylic acid could reduce pain quickly. You briefly search for sorrel in the mud, but settle instead for squeezing a patch of icy rainwater over your hand. It stings, but at least it's sterile-ish. A distant roll of thunder rumbles, sounding like an army of siege engines approaching. Here's a scholarly debate phrase for you. Historians still argue whether thunderstorms were interpreted as divine warnings or merely bad weather. Either way, you feel divinely annoyed. Your teeth continue their martial percussion, and you wonder if chattering at this volume might alert any nearby guards. Sneak mode feels impossible. You leap across a small drainage ditch, more a frozen moat than a mere channel, and land with a spray of icy slush. The water soaks through your stockings instantly, and your toes begin to tingle with that delightful numb pain you reserve these days for budget airline seats. You consider humming a tune to distract yourself, but the jingle-jangle of your gear drowns out any melody. Besides, no one would appreciate your rendition of Rain, Rain, Go Away, performed by a soaked, wounded assassin. Up ahead, the muddy path splits left, leads deeper into open fields where guard patrols use hounds. Right leads toward a narrow forest path rumored to be less trafficked, but teeming with brambles. You weigh your options, brave the open under spotlight like rain, or risk tearing your remaining cloak. You choose the forest, because at least there you can hide under a tree, though the branches drip cold drops like tiny water torture devices. Immersed in the woods, the canopy offers minimal shelter. Rain trickles down each leaf before diving onto your face. You stumble over gnarled roots coated in slime, every fall chipping away your resolve. A mocking raven watches from above, croaking like a ticked-off GPS, recalculating. You swipe at its beady eye, hoping it takes the hint and flies off. It doesn't. In the darkness you slip again and slide down a muddy bank into a shallow creek. The water is ice cold, immediately numbing your calf, and you whoosh as you land butt first in the current. You kick to stay upright, but the creek grips you, reminding you that natural defenses often beat man-made ones. Peasant lore insisted that carrying a sprig of rosemary warded off chills. Fringe tip for you, though. Sprigs rarely grew in creek beds. Finally, you haul yourself out, dripping and shivering, Leviathan-esque patches of red mud plastered across your jerkin. You press on each step, a testament to stubbornness and poor life choices. You realize the rain and terrain aren't adversaries you can outfight. They're forces you must outlast. Your muscles ache, your blood is cold, and your teeth seem to have formed their own percussion ensemble. Yet in this soggy trial by weather, you find a grim humor. If you survive the next few hours, you'll earn bragging rights about suffering the worst commute in recorded history. For now, though, you're just a bedraggled silhouette, moving through mud and rain, fighting off hypothermia infection, and the sneaking thought that perhaps you should have picked a warmer profession like treasure hunter in the Sahara. But here you are, still breathing, still moving, and still surprising every medieval hound within earshot that you can make a racket even without armor. You trudge on, teeth chattering like wooden maracas, and remind yourself a week as a medieval assassin means surviving this frozen nightmare, and you're barely halfway through. You find a narrow alcove beneath a collapsed tree trunk to catch your breath, and your stomach growls so loudly it might echo in the next county. Hunger claws at you sharper than any dagger. Medieval soldiers typically received about 1 pound of coarse bread and a few ounces of salted pork per day, if they were lucky. Mainstream fact. Your own stash is a sorry assortment of a half-soggy bread roll, a shard of dried fish, and a handful of nutshells you swiped from a traveling merchant's cart. You unwrap the bread, its crust soft from damp air, and wonder if you've ever tasted anything so bland or so desperate. You take a bite and nearly gag as you detect a hint of mold weaving through the dough. Better than nothing, you tell yourself, though modern influences would accuse you of fake surviving for the camera. You chew slowly, mindful that every crumb counts, yet your stomach rumbles like a snoring monk during vespers. A light joke drifts through your foggy mind. You'd kill for a bag of Doritos, but back then, corn chips were centuries away. As you nibble, a scuttling noise draws your gaze to a rat the size of a small terrier scampering across the leaf litter. These vermin were common in medieval households and notorious for devouring provisions left unattended. You shove your bread toward the rodent curiosity mixed with pity, only to have it dart forward and snag the crust in its teeth before squeaking triumphantly and disappearing under the roots. You snarl at its retreating tail. Thanks for the tip, buddy. You attempt to salvage your dried fish only to find half of it gnawed away. Rats must have gotten to it first teeth, sharpening on your supper like uninvited dinner guests. Fringe rumors suggest some assassins carried rat poison in their pouches for just this reason. A handy two birds, one stone approach that probably violated every code of hospitality ever written. Historians still argue whether such poison was ineffective on rodents or simply too dangerous to handle without gloves. Your stomach growls again, and you press a hand to your midsection, imagining a civil conversation. "Hey, stomach, could you maybe wait until we're back in a tavern?" No such luck. The gnawing hunger threatens to distract you from sneaking through enemy territory. You prick your thumb on a shard of jerkin button and instantly regret the extra pain, but at least blood is food of champions, right? Light joke. You rummage for any edible weeds, dandelion greens perhaps, but the downpour turned the forest floor into a soggy salad bar of mildewed leaves. In peasant lore, rabbits were known to nibble on clover and safe greens. Some field guides recommended fermenting nettles into a gruel, though that solution sounds like something best reserved for plague victims with nothing left to lose. Instead, you scrape a few soggy leaves into your mouth. They taste like wet paper, but they fill a gap in your uncooperative stomach. Your mind drifts to the fleeting comfort of a tavern stew, peppered meaty, and served with a spoon so clean you barely fear eating off it. Here, you're stuck with makeshift utensils, a twig you sharpened into a spork-like implement, and a dented pewter flask half filled with brackish water. Medieval ration water often came from communal barrels, which meant everyone from millers to mule drivers dunked their cups in the same vat. Cheery, yes, but one way to host a microbe party. You sip, carefully suppressing a shudder as remnants of last week's barley float by. In the gloom, you notice movement near your elbow, a pair of glowing eyes belonging to a particularly bold rat. It twitches its whiskers and edges closer, no doubt lured by the scent of stale bread still clinging to your fingers. You shoo it away only to have it return with reinforcements. Turns out rats travel in squads. Fringe accounts hint that some medieval rations included pieces of dried briar rose petals as natural rat deterrents. But you doubt that worked better than a mousetrap. Modern pest control sounds downright luxurious compared to this. Your stomach's gurgling crescendos into a growl that rings like church bells at dawn, betraying your position to any nearby patrols. You press a finger to your lips, pleading for silence, but you know the rumbling in your gut is louder than any whispered shush. A scholarly debate arises. In your foggy mind, historians still argue whether hunger pangs were considered a badge of honor among foot soldiers or simply a sign of gross mismanagement by quartermasters. You, however, feel more like a cautionary tale. Dark shapes shift in the underbrush, a family of rats rummaging through the detritus of campfires long cold. Their noses twitch as they scent your nearby meal scraps. You snap the twig spark in half and brandish it like a sword, though it's about as threatening as a soggy noodle. You jab the air aiming to scare them off, but the rats barely flinch. They've faced worse threats from passing donkey herds. One bold rodent lunges at your hand, maybe it's seeking revenge for stolen crumbs, and you leap back yelping like a startled jester. Shivering, you wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders and decide to move on. You tuck what remains of your bread into a leather pouch to protect it from further raids, only to discover a family of fleas hitching a ride. Yay, bonus protein, if you count itchy bites as a meal. Some medieval travelers burned rosemary to ward off pests. Fringe tip for next time. For now, you swipe at your cloak and whisper apologies to your skin. Pressing forward, you realize that hunger isn't your only adversary. Fatigue, cold, and infection from your wounded palm are gnawing at your resolve too. Yet the emptiness in your stomach is the most immediate crisis. Your energy wanes, and you find yourself staggering, mouth-watering at the memory of fresh meat. You recall that some mercenary bands carried salted fish wrapped in oak bark. The tannin prevented spoilage, or so they claimed. You'd trade your life savings for a chunk of that right now. As you slump against a mossy rock, you prick your fingers again on the tapestry fragment still tied around your palm. At least that holy fragment is consistent. You wonder if the saint depicted on the cloth would pity your plight or just scold you for poor planning. You force another handful of sorrel leaves into your mouth, chewing slowly to eke out whatever vitamins you can. The taste is fierce, like chewing on lemon rind, perking you up, if only for a moment. A distant crow caws echoing your own ravenous thoughts. You rub your belly and whisper, "Just get me back home before I eat the furniture." Light joke. But there's no time for humor. You need to find better rations or risk literal tummy betrayal at the worst possible moment, like mid-escape, when every stomach kick might sound like an alarm. You push to your feet, acknowledging that scavenging isn't enough. You'll need to raid a storage hut or kitchen, though that means facing more guards, more locks, and more rats. You remind yourself of that goat from Section 4 livestock served as alarm systems too. You inhale the damp forest air and steel your nerves, readying to pivot from hiding to hunting for food, not people. Tomorrow's first course might be a rat stew fringe suggestion, but tonight you'll settle for victory in finding anything edible. You swallow, tasting the bitter tang of sorrel and the faint tickle of flea bites, and you trudge onward under a canopy dripping with rain. Hunger is your relentless companion, and until you secure proper rations, it will drive you to the brink of desperation. If lasting a week as a medieval assassin means outsmarting rats and stomach growls alike, you're running dangerously low on both cunning and calories. You slip through a half-open door into the warm glow of the bristled board tavern, where the air is thick with wood smoke spilled ale and the low hum of half-intoxicated gossip. Your belly, still yearning for a proper meal, tightens as the scent of roasting meat drifts past. But the real feast hears the chatter. In medieval England, Taverns were state-sanctioned gathering spots where townsfolk legally congregated to drink, gamble, and share news sometimes before the town crier even updated the notice board. Mainstream fact. You sidled to the bar hoping to blend in by ordering a tankard of weak ale. You learned your lesson about strong spirits triggering coughing fits. But every curt nod in your direction feels like an all-access invitation to Rumor Mill Central. You lean against a rough-hewn pillar, trying to appear casual as your chainmail creaks, and the rattling of your gear draws a few curious glances. A plump barkeep wipes a ceramic mug with a rag that's probably seen more spills than a toddler at dinner time. You attempt a light joke under your breath. Nice place. No rats. Yet. But the barkeep shoots you a sidelong look, as if measuring how thirsty you are versus how suspicious. Around you, two broad-shouldered fishmongers argue over eel prices. A trio of weavers play dice in a corner, and an aging minstrel strums a mournful tune. Their voices rise and fall, forming patterns of gossip. Did you hear how Lady Winifred's jewels vanished? I swear I saw ghostly lights at the old mill. They say the bailiff's son ran off with the blacksmith's daughter. Each snippet lands in the air like breadcrumbs attracting pigeons. Except these birds are human, and their tongues are sharper than any blade. You remind yourself of that goat from Section 4 whose bleat nearly gave you away. This place may smell better than a barnyard, but its acoustic network is just as effective. One whispered rumor in the bristled boar can travel through alehouse to keep through blacksmith's forge and back into the tavern in under a night's watch. Historians still argue whether tavern gossip actually influenced royal court politics or was simply fodder for peasant entertainment. But, a single mention of strange cloaked figure is enough to spark a city-wide manhunt. You order your ale in a voice so gravelly it sounds like someone blended sand into a smoothie. The barkeep pours, and the frothy head spills over, dripping onto a coaster that's more whole than wood. You nurse the ale, savoring its mild bitterness, and focus on listening rather than speaking. 3 mugs down, and you catch a snippet. I saw her masked woman slip into the guild hall. Guild halls were private guarded sanctuaries where only members could enter, meaning a non-member's presence would set off alarm bells. A fringe tidbit flickers in your memory. Some tavern keepers allegedly employed caged songbirds trained to mimic specific words or phrases to test whether patrons had heard certain rumors. If the bird squawked assassin's hood or blood on the floor, the keeper knew gossip had reached far beyond the cellar. You scan the rafters. No birds, thankfully, though you can't shake the sensation you're being tested. Maybe it's just the echo of your own paranoia, which is ramping up nicely. As you eavesdrop on 2 townsmen discussing a recent robbery at the miller's granary, you notice how each retelling adds flourishes. The thief wore crimson gloves, left a calling card etched in flour, and laughed maniacally as he fled. In reality, the only evidence was a handful of spilled grain and a few muddy footprints. The seductive allure of storytelling means every tavern tale grows more elaborate, making you look like the villain in someone else's bedtime story. You decide to play along. You lean closer to a gray-bearded cooper, nodding solemnly when he mentions someone moving in the shadows. He grunts approval and names a street near the city gates. At least, it's a less guarded thoroughfare. Jenny's Lane notorious for crooked peddlers and thieves. You copy the location in your mind, planning an alternate escape route, all while reminding yourself that this tactic of disinformation was perfected by spies and double agents. A scholarly debate still steals through your thoughts. Historians argue whether rumor-mongering was a deliberate tool of espionage or merely the natural byproduct of communal life. You finish your ale and tip the barkeep with a copper penny, noting how the clang resonates around the room. Currency in the Middle Ages varied regionally, often consisting of farthings, pennies, and groats, each stamped with different symbols to prevent counterfeiting. That makes your single penny a potential giveaway. If any local coin expert spots it came from a distant mint, they'll peg you as an outsider. You tuck the change in your pouch and vow to avoid any more transactions here. Your ears pick up movement behind you, two women at a nearby table cloaked and leaning close pass a small sealed letter back and forth. You catch a flash of crimson wax bearing a pictogram of a lion rampant, a signet of a minor noble house. They whisper, "The order is tonight. The black-hooded stranger is expected at the north wall." Your heart thuds. That could be you or someone following you. You must decide stay and overhear, more risking exposure, or vanish before the talk turns to descriptions you can't contradict. You choose stealthy retreat. As you rise, your chair screeches a betraying sound you promised yourself you'd avoid after that squealing hinge in Section 3. Heads swivel, eyes tracking your upward motion. You force a slow nod, pretending to inspect the ceiling beams for damage. A plump taverner mutters, "That one looks guilty." Your face warms guilt by default. You slip through the side door into an alley that reeks of fermenting apples and stale dung, a fragrant reminder that medieval sanitation wasn't exactly Michelin-starred. The sudden shift from warm tavern to cool night air feels like diving into a moat. You lean against the brick heart pounding and replay the whispered instructions from the letter north wall, rendezvous, hooded stranger. If this is a trap, your cover is blown. You clench your teeth, recalling the cautious pacing from Section 1 and the noisy geese from Section 7. Okay, it was a rat, but still, you tuck your hood lower, hoping the fabric's wear and dye obscure your identity better than any face paint. The world outside the tavern is silent by comparison, save for the distant bark of a hound. You remind yourself that hedges, rooftops, and back alleys serve as informal tunnels for those who know the city's underbelly. Few guard patrols bother to memorize them. Your throat tightens. The gossip network you sought to exploit just handed you your personal exit strategy and possibly your doom. You step forward into the night, the tavern's warmth fading behind you like a half-remembered dream. Trust no one, you remind yourself. In medieval times, a single slip of the tongue could cost you your head. As you fade into shadow once more, you realize that betrayers don't always carry steel. Sometimes they wield a well-timed whisper. If you survive the echo of every rumor, you might still stand a fighting chance. But gossip is faster than any horse, and tonight it gallops ahead of you, mapping your fate in whispered lies. You slip into the shadowed nave of St. Odo's Church, the scent of incense curling in the air like ghostly fingers reaching for your collar, and immediately wish you'd paid attention in Sunday school. Pebbles crunch underfoot as you navigate between wooden pews, each one polished to a dull glow by centuries of elbows and hymnals. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 mandated annual confession for all Christians. So every parish priest expects a line of penitence as reliable as screen notifications on your phone. Mainstream fact. Tonight, you're neither sheep nor shepherd. You're an intruder, hoping the confessional booth offers more cover than your flickering chainmail. Your hooded cloak brushes against a row of kneelers, and you recall that squealing hinge from Section 3. This church's door barely squeaks, but confessionals snap shut with a satisfying click that would make a locksmith proud. You pad closer, heart fluttering like a hummingbird on espresso, and choose the left booth. Why left? Because the right one smells faintly of goat cheese, probably from the barn goats sacrificed at last month's feast. Call back to Section 4. You settle against the wooden grill, the cool lattice biting your cheek. A soft female voice floats through the grill. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Your palms sweat against your robes. Priests kept meticulous records in confession registers, inked parchment listing sins and penances, so every whispered word lived forever in church archives. Historians still argue whether these records were ever truly confidential or if bishops used them as a rogue FBI to root out heresy. You clear your throat ready to speak, but you've practiced "I stole a loaf of bread" too many times. Today's crime list is far more intricate. Instead, you lean back, letting the priest launch into an encouraging homily about God's mercy and the dangers of pride. The candlelight flickers, casting your shadow across the booth wall like you're starring in a low-budget horror flick. A stray breeze stirs a smudge of incense ash onto your sleeve. Fringe rumor says some priests used ash from consecrated palms collected on Palm Sunday to detect lies. If it burned hotter against a liar's skin, they'd be caught red-handed. You hope that's nonsense because your face is already hotter than a smithy's forge. A scratchy pen scratches paper on the other side. Your sins are being recorded. You hear the swirl of ink and the careful murmur of Latin. You imagine your crimes transcribed letter by letter, sealed in red wax, destined for a dusty archive alongside grave matters like heresy and sundial theft. It feels oddly intimate, you confessing sins in the same booth where locals admit to gluttony or gossip. In medieval towns, church attendance was enforced by social pressure. Skipping Mass risked public shaming or even fines. You try not to giggle at picturing medieval flash notifications shaming you for missing services. The priest clears his throat. Have you taken an oath of silence, my child? He asks, voice gentle yet probing. You imagine a pop-up on your phone, remind a weekly confession due. But in this era, there's no snooze button, just moral dread. You murmur that you have, but that's not quite true. You swore silence to a noble, then spilled secrets to a rat, literally to the rat from Section 8, and now your conscience is rattling like a rickety cart. The priest sighs, calling this a sin of betrayal. You nod, though he can't see you. Your hood hides your face, but not your grimace. Outside the church door creaks guard patrol. A stray waft of wind, you momentarily freeze, clutching the grill. The aisles hum with candlelight, hushes and the distant drip of a broken gutter. You feel exposed. Every pause in the priest's questions is an invitation to bolt. But you stay hoping the next penance grants you enough anonymity to slip away unscathed. Your penance, the priest intones, is to recite 5 Our Fathers and 10 Hail Marys, and to perform an act of charity. You quietly calculate how many minutes that will buy you before the next patrol passes by. You mutter the prayers under your breath, phonetics sticking in your throat like half-chewed bread. This is no bilingual meditation app. As you whisper, Hail Mary full of grace, your mind drifts to that tapestry fragment from section 5. You wonder if saintly blessings stitched into cloth count as charity or just another fringe superstition. The last, Our Father, leaves your lips, and the priest closes his register with a soft tuck of parchment. Go in peace, he says, his voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling like church bells at dawn. You push the grill aside and stand knees stiff from kneeling. The booth smells of beeswax, confession ink, and sweaty hair, an aroma almost as distinct as a ramen shop at 3 a.m. You navigate back toward the nave, but a group of devout worshipers enters from midnight prayer. Lantern light paints halos around their heads, and you're sandwiched between holiness and suspicion. One elderly woman clutches a rosary, lips moving in silent supplication. Another kneels on a pew, eyes closed, cradling a baby swaddled in fusty linen. You stare at their peaceful faces and feel a pang. Even if your week as a medieval assassin succeeds, you're surrounded by souls seeking salvation, not vengeance. You slip out the side door into the churchyard, where moonlight silhouettes tombstones leaning like old friends. The grass is wet with dew, each blade glittering. You step carefully to avoid squeaky stones. Noisy gravestones would be the ultimate betrayal. A fringe detail flickers. Some medieval grave markers were equipped with mort safes or heavy iron cages to prevent body snatchers from stealing corpses from medical schools. You doubt any surgeon's interest here. Tonight, your own body feels precarious enough. A robin perches on a weathered cross, chirping softly. You pause, struck by the absurdity that life thrives even among death. Historians still argue whether robin sightings were seen as omens of God's favor or simple coincidence. But right now, you take any sign that you're not being hunted by heaven and earth alike. You draw a deep breath, tasting the cool night air laced with church incense, and steel yourself to move on. You check your reflection in a mossy baptismal font. Green stains dance across your cheekbone, and think medieval assassins didn't get red carpets. They got confession carpets and moral scrubbing. You wipe your face on your sleeve, though it only spreads the soot. You decide you've paid your dues in prayer, and it's time to resume your hunt, or maybe just run for your life. As you step away, the church bells toll midnight, 15 slow peals that vibrate through your bones. In medieval lore, midnight bells were said to ward off demons. You hope they don't attract watchmen. You hurry down the lane, every echo threatening to reveal your presence. Beneath that solemn chime, you realize if you survive the scrutiny of confession and the weight of your own conscience, you might just survive another day. But surviving the week, that's an entirely different sermon. You slip through the low archway of the manor courtyard, heart still thumping from the midnight bells, and face perhaps your most formidable obstacle, yet the Lord's personal patrols. In 14th century Europe, local lords maintained garrisons of 50 armed men, complete with spears, swords, and crossbows, essentially a private army, answering only to their liege mainstream fact. Tonight, you're the unwelcome guest tiptoeing past sentries whose loyalty is bolstered by pay privilege and a hearty disdain for strangers in dark cloaks. The air here smells of wet stone and hay from the stables, a strange comfort after the churchyard's incense. 4 guards stand in a loose semicircle beneath flickering lanterns strapped to stout oak posts. Their breastplates glint faintly in the half-light. You recall the goat sentinel from Section 4 and wonder if these men rely on livestock whistles or just sharpened swords. Historians still argue whether medieval patrols favored rotation schedules or a more randomized system to catch intruders off guard, but either way, you're stuck with whatever pattern they follow tonight. You pace the perimeter, measuring the distance between each guard roughly 30 feet, though spacing shifts when they swap shifts or break for ale. When one sentry yawns, you strain to hear if it's exhaustion or feigned boredom. A stray breeze rattles the lanterns, casting dancing shadows that mimic an approaching cavalry, and you stifle a shudder. The faint click of chain mail from Section 3 feels primitive compared to these disciplined ranks. Yet your own rattling gear still feels like fireworks under their helmets. You try a fringe tactic you picked up in a tattered scroll, sprinkle handfuls of crushed walnut shells along your path to muffle footsteps. Allegedly, some assassins of the Italian city-states used olive pits for the same purpose, believing the hard shells crushed underfoot produced a soft, muffled crunch. You crouch low, dusting shells onto the flagstones. The result is underwhelming, a muted crunch that still sounds like an empty wine cask being kicked. You snort quietly. Professional assassin or botched kitchen renovation. Light joke. Your stomach growls a callback to Section 8, reminding you that hunger and stealth seldom coexist peacefully. One guard shifts position, catching a glimmer of walnut dust under the lantern's glow. He squints, leans forward, and mutters something to his neighbor. Your breath catches. Bribery flashes through your mind. In medieval courts, lesser knights were sometimes paid off with silver pennies or small favors bribes known as gifts of goodwill to look the other way. Historians still argue whether such corruption was systemic or rare instances of opportunistic greed. But to you, it seems like a lifeline. You fish a copper penny from your pouch, careful not to let any expert spot its distant Mint Section 9 callback, and tiptoe to the nearest guard's boot. With one swift flick, you place it at his feet and melt back into shadow. The guard grunts, stoops, and pockets the coin without looking around. It's a minor victory, but it buys you precious seconds. You grin, whispering, "Who knew coin collecting paid off?" light joke. Beyond the sentries, the Lord's Keep rises like a dark monolith. Its battlements bristle with arrow slits and murder holes. Those narrow openings were designed for defenders to rain arrows or boiling oil onto attackers. Defenders often poured lard mixed with pitch for extra stickiness, another fringe tidbit you can't help but mentally note. You wonder if that greasy thread tastes as bad as it sounds, then shake your head. Not going to be dipping in that fondue. You advance toward a side postern, skirting the edge of a horse stall where steeds snort and paw at straw. The stable smells of sweet hay and spilled oats, a comforting contrast to earlier blood and incense. You pause to admire the horses' sleek coats, though you can't help thinking they'd kick you into tomorrow if startled. A stable hand yawns nearby, leaning on a pitchfork. His gaze drifts to your coin-bribed guard. You hold your breath and recall that medieval foot soldiers sometimes disguised themselves as stable hands to infiltrate estates. Maybe it's your chunky boots or your chainmail ruffled gait that gives you away. Either way, you mutter, "Blend in, blend in." You slip past the stall and find a narrow drainage channel. Remember the dank drain from Section 4 that winds along the castle's inner wall. Moonlight flickers on stagnant water that smells faintly of fermenting ale. You stomach the stench, crawling in on hands and knees. Each movement risks another clink of metal, but the channel's stone floor is surprisingly quiet beneath your boots. It reminds you of that squeal-free burlap trick you once tried, though this time you've replaced burlap with desperation. The channel emerges near the armory entrance, a stout door reinforced with iron bands and an ornate lock. You press your ear to the wood, hearing muffled footsteps and brass weapon racks clinking inside. Access denied unless you pick the lock or pay another bribe. You check your pouch, 2 pennies left, and you've burned one on a guard already. You debate whether a direct approach with a well-placed coin under the keyhole might work. Historians still argue whether medieval lock wards were so complex that only master locksmiths could open them, or if common thieves routinely picked them with ease. You decide on a gamble. You slide out a penny hefted in your palm and gently press it into the lock's key slot. It wedges in, humming, no whining, as if protesting. The lock rattles. You spin the coin with gentle pressure. With a soft click, the bolt slides free. You blink in surprise. Bribery has turned into a mechanical hack. You step back and lift the door latch silently, another petty miracle in a line of dubious miracles tonight. Inside the armory is dimly lit by a single iron brazier. Rack upon rack holds polearms, swords, axes, and crossbows. You feel a primal urge to stash away a lighter weapon, maybe a short bow or throwing axe, but your pouch is awkwardly heavy. Instead, you snag a padded leather cap and slip it under your cloak to muffle that chainmail halo from Section 3. The fringe rumor about Olive Pit's sound mutes turns out to be toast. You need something more substantial. The cap molds to your hood, and you pat it in satisfaction. Upgrade unlocked. Light joke. Your newfound treasure gains you a fraction of stealth, but alertness is high. From the armory, you can now see the guardroom corridor, where the drunken Captain Section 2 callback snores atop a bench. He's oblivious to the missing money and missing door hardware. Good. You lean back against the wall, savoring the quiet. Yet beneath the surface hums the knowledge that once discovered, these defenses will tighten. More patrols, more gates, maybe even hounds unleashed. You exit the armory through a neglected side door leading to a covered gallery. Tapestries flutter in the draft, their ornate scenes of hunting parties and saintly miracles seeming to sneer at your ragged appearance. You traverse the corridor, counting steps until you reach a staircase descending toward the outer bailey. The lanterns here flicker erratically as though warning you, next stop chaos. As you place your foot on the first worn step, you recall every bribe, every borrowed tactic, and every squeak you've muffled tonight. You realize that noble patronage and the brute patrols it commands are formidable foes rarely outwitted by lone intruders. Surviving a week means navigating these shifting loyalties and fortified defenses on the fly without the safety net of modern police backup. If this is day 11, you've almost earned a degree in both crime and penance. You descend into the darkness each step a measured risk. Lantern light fades behind you, replaced by the muted drip of groundwater and the distant rumble of armored boots above. You clutch your makeshift cap, your last modest victory in a night of stringing together half-truths, bribes, and borrowed legends. You press your palm against the cool stone of a deserted corridor, heart still rattling from the descent, and realize that surviving this far depends as much on information as on steel. You've relied on whispered tips and hastily forged letters, but tonight you'll learn how rotten intel and false allies can lead you into a trap sharper than any dagger. In medieval courts, professional spies called runners or postern runners sold secrets to the highest bidder, often fabricating stories to pad their earnings. Mainstream fact. Tonight, your lifeline is only as good as the words guiding you. Earlier, you met a cloaked messenger near the market gate who claimed the Lord would be in his private chapel at dawn, a supposedly empty corridor you could slip through to reach the treasury. You tucked that promise into your mind, forgetting that medieval informers sometimes carried a pen of penance to etch falsehoods into parchment. Fringe whispers say certain double agents would mix in chili powder, so inked lies burned on contact, but you doubt you'd notice literary spice under your fingers' smear. Historians still argue whether such alchemical inks were widespread or mere rumors born of alchemist showmanship. But either way, you're about to find out. You trudge down the corridor toward the chapel cloak, swirling like a lonely ghost in motion. The corridor smells faintly of damp incense echoing Section 10's confession booth, but smudged with the acrid tang of spilled oil lamps. Every footstep resounds in the flagstones, reminding you of Section 3's noisy armor and Section 7's mud-soaked boots. Noise has a way of multiplying when you least need it. You round a corner expecting silent marble halls and instead come face to face with a dozen armed retainers forming an impromptu patrol. Your breath hitches. You've walked straight into the Lord's night watch. You duck into an alcove heart pounding like a smith's hammer. The men-at-arms exchange knowing glances. They're armored in plate and chain, and their spears glint like icy teeth. These aren't simple palace guards, but veteran retainers, summoned by a preacher's rumor of a shadowy assassin in the chapel. One gruff veteran grips a torch. The flicker reveals bloodstains on his gauntlet, your handiwork perhaps from Section 6's poison fiasco. You swallow, praying they don't recognize the emblem on your leather cap, Section 11 callback. You creep backward, but your spur catches on a loose stone, producing a hollow clunk. The torch-bearing guard spins eyes narrowing. You press your back against the wall, chest heaving, and consider your options. Running seems futile. The corridor dead ends in heavy oak doors thick with iron bands. Riddle of thought or not, you're about to learn why false intel is worst when it leaves you nowhere to go. A flicker of lightning through a narrow window throws dancing shadows over the group. You whisper a light joke under your breath. Worst guided tour ever, hoping for humor to steady your nerve. One guard snorts and steps closer, ramming his spear butt against the floor. The vibration travels up the shaft and into your spine, jolting you awake. You wonder if a modern GPS error sounds this ominous, or if it just recalculates with polite beeps instead of spear butts. As the guard approaches, you recall the messenger's parting words. Once inside, turn left at the saint statue, ignore the choir loft. Choir lofts are known hideouts, but tonight the statue stands just beyond the guards. You dart forward, adrenaline spiking, and slip between two soldiers like a cat burglar in a yoga class. A guard swipes at empty air, and you tumble into a recessed cape, snagging on a rusty hook. The rip echoes like laughter at your expense. You tear free and sprint toward a carved niche, holding a battered statue of Saint Hildegard, the patron saint of secrets. You remember from Section 5 that saints on tapestries and statues sometimes bore inscriptions, fringe details that whispered hidden prayers. Here the saint's eyes follow you. You wonder if the master carver imbued it with bewitched lenses or if it's just clever shadow work. Historians still argue whether medieval artists hid secret messages in stone or if we're all just looking too hard. Heart pounding, you pivot and spot an arched doorway marked sacristy, your supposed back exit. You slam into it only to find it locked from the inside. The messenger never mentioned a sacristy door. Panic flares, the false ally has sewn a noose of lies. Your only exit is back through the corridor of guards. You spin, rip off your hood in a vain bid to appear less suspicious, and charge back hoping the chaos of sudden movement buys you a gap. Spears whirl, torches flare against stone. You dive beneath the guard's arm, ducking the butt of a halberd, and scramble across a stone bench. A stray spark from a knocked-over lantern hisses on the floor, flaring the hem of your cloak briefly. You flick it back. No flamboyant escapes, please. And your voice emerges in a hoarse half-snarl. I'm the new choir recruit. It's nonsense. But the guard hesitates, perplexed by the absurdity. You vault over a pew, spitting out cobwebs from Section 10's churchyard memories, and land amidst a cluster of hymnals. The guards close in chanting orders that blur together like a drum circle practicing for an apocalypse. Your eyes dart to a heavy brass chandelier overhead. A light joke teases your lips. Time for free-fall karaoke. But there's little room for comedic effect when death is on standby. You grab a hymn book and fling it at a guard's face. The smack echoes like a war trumpet. He staggers, giving you a fraction of a second. You dart toward a window glass. Shards still litter the sill from Section 6's frantic exit, and heaving your weight against the frame, you push it open. Rain sluices in, plastering your hair to your scalp and giving you that bedraggled look you perfected in Section 7's downpour. With the guards roaring behind you, you leap through the window, feeling glass bite into your arms. A light joke escapes. At least I'm consistent with fashion sacrifices. You twist in midair, managing to drop your sword but keeping your dagger. You land on a sloped roof slick with moss and rain and slide down, praying the fall won't break more than your ego. You crash through a thatched skylight, lumbering into a storeroom filled with linen sacks and barrels. The musty scent of grains and hops engulfed you. This wasn't part of the chapel exit, but a forgotten storeroom means your foes will hesitate to chase you here, fearing traps or marauding rats. You catch your breath, chest heaving, hearing the shouts and rushing feet outside. You pant, recalling the false promise that lured you here, and vow next time, verify your sources before planning an escape route. In the dim glow of an overturned lantern, you spot a narrow trap door in the floor brass ring, polished by countless hands. Could it lead down to the storeroom tunnels you glimpsed earlier, near the Armory Section 11, or is it a pit for smuggling contraband? You flip the ring and lift the lid. Cool air from below rushes up, smelling of earth and secrets untouched by torches. You hesitate. Trust is a precious commodity in this world, and every hidden door feels like a test. You muster up a grin. If it's another prank, it better have a comfy landing pad. You swing your legs over the edge and lower yourself into the darkness, dagger in hand, ready to gamble on one more unreliable tip. Behind you, the chapel doors burst open, torches illuminating the storeroom entrance. You slide through the trapdoor as a guard plunges face first into the dank tunnel, emerging triumphant and lampless, shouting a curse at his comrades. You whisper to the echoing stone beneath your boots, "Thanks for paving the way, friend." The tunnel smells of earth mold and faint echoes of past escapes, both triumphant and fatal. You press forward, every careful footstep a reminder that information can be the quickest route to doom when it's built on lies. You hug the damp wall until you find a slope leading upward, and as you emerge into a narrow alley behind the stables, you realize false allies and twisted intel won't just end your run, they'll carve your epitaph. Tonight, you live to see another morning. But keep this in mind, in the medieval game of whispers, the sharpest blade is often the truth, and you've just nicked yourself on a fib. You pause beneath a flickering brazier in the narrow alley, breath-ragged mind racing through every squeak, whisper, and heartbeat that's betrayed you tonight. No blade can harm you as swiftly as your own fraying nerves. In medieval societies, soldiers and spies knew the weight of fear all too well. Records show that chronic paranoia led some knights to wander into their own moats, convinced shadows were enemy scouts. Mainstream fact. You, dear assassin, are teetering on that same knife's edge of madness. Your chest constricts as you recall every misstep, the squealing hinge in Section 3, the goat's bleat in Section 4, the false intel in Section 12. Memories loop in your mind like a haunting refrain, each replay twisting reality further. The alley walls loom narrowing like the bars of a cage. You inch forward, ears straining for any sound, footsteps, distant laughter, or the telltale drip of water that might signal a hidden entrance. Your heart drums so loudly you half expect a guard to tune into the beat. A stray breeze rustles the stash of oaken leaves at your feet, and you flinch, sure it's a footstep. You grip your dagger hilt and suppress a yelp, your pulse pounding in your temples. Fringe rumors whisper that some paranoid courtiers carried small flasks of liquid courage, a medieval mix of wine herbs and ground gemstones, believing the crystals emboldened the spirit. You don't have such luxuries, only a ragged cloak and a dagger heavy with guilt. Historians still argue whether such pseudo-precious elixirs offer genuine tonic or simply placebo laced with sparkly grit. Your shoulders slump as exhaustion tugs at your limbs. Exhaustive nights blur the line between truth and imagination. That rat from Section 8 now seems less rodent and more demon in fur. You recall the sausage dog of a merchant from Section 9 whose tail you mistook for a hidden blade, and upon closer thought, it might have been. Paranoia spins fanciful conspiracies. Children's laughs become mocking taunts, lantern glows, murmur-coded messages, and every cobblestone shift becomes a riddle you can't solve. You press your back to the damp wall fingertips, trailing the cool stone. The texture is uneven, mottled with traces of ancient mortar and modern grime. You wonder if this alley served as a secret meeting place centuries ago. Legends say hidden societies engraved symbols on walls to guide conspirators. Some claim these spy marks resembled stray scratches or moss patterns only visible under moonlight. Historians still argue whether these marks were genuine clandestine signposts or just the results of natural wear. You scan the wall but see only random chips and streaks, though in your state every mark flickers with hidden meaning. A distant bell tolls 3 times curfew or cruel mockery. Each chime feels like a knell for your sanity. The noise ricochets bouncing off roofs and creeping corridors, layering into a percussive nightmare. You breathe in, breathe out, but your breaths come shallow, rapid. You taste tangy copper again, but it's not blood this time. It's the metallic scent of fear. Your eyes flick to a stray cat perched on a barrel across the street. Its eyes glow emerald in the torchlight. It looks at you with unnervingly human curiosity, head tilting. You half expect it to speak. Another fringe tale surfaces. Some believed familiars, witches, animal companions could spy for sorcerers carrying messages mentally via purring vibrations. You shake your head to clear the ridiculous thought. Historians still argue whether such beliefs stemmed from real animal behavior or mass superstition. Regardless, that cat's stare unnerves you more than any guard. Your knees weaken and you drop into a shallow ditch. Mud splashes onto your coif as you crouch, senses dulled by fatigue, and lingering toxins curse that nightshade mishap from Section 6. You realize that the greatest peril isn't a sword's edge, but the gaping maw of doubt in your own mind. You rub your temples trying to massage clarity back into your skull. A soft whisper seems to drift from behind a voice saying your name. You whirl around, dagger raised, scanning the darkness. There's nothing but the whisper of wind through crevices. You exhale slowly, chastising yourself. Sleep deprivation has turned the wind into a gossiping neighbor. You try yawning, but your jaw aches too much from the day's tension. Stepping out of the ditch, you stumble over a coaxing vine creeping across the alley floor. You swear it slithered toward you. In fringe, herbalist circles, ivy leaves were ground into powders to ward off evil spirits, an odd quirk believed to protect from unseen threats. You stoop to pluck a leaf, rubbing it between your fingers for comfort, before remembering you'd have to taste it for it to work. No thanks. As you rise, you spot a grating window high above faint lamplight dancing through iron bars. It could be another exit or secret tunnel. You weigh the risk, stay in the open, risking more hallucinations, or climb risking noisy metal and a bone-breaking fall. Your muscles tremble at the thought of scaling stone, but staying here feels like courting death by delirium. You begin your ascent feat, scrabbling in the mortar's cracks. Each hold tests your resolve. The whetstone is slick beneath your fingers. You curse the absence of grappling hooks or modern ropes. The ratio of slippery ledge to clumsy climber is unforgiving. Halfway up, your foot slips, and you lurch backward before catching yourself by a finger. Pain flares, but focus sharpens. You can't afford to slip now. Above the window beckons just a few more feet. You heave, throat straining, and manage to lift yourself over the sill. You land with a grunt inside a small, dusty storeroom filled with wooden crates and straw bales. Your boots press into loose grain, and you inhale the earthy aroma, grateful for a moment of silence. This hidden nook feels removed from the world above, a refuge from prying eyes and rattling chains. You sink against the wall, closing your eyes. For a moment, there's peace, no bells, no goats, no endless heel click of your gear. You let your breath normalize, trading gasps for calm inhales. You rub the grain from your sleeve, tiny specks falling to the floor like sand in an hourglass, marking the passing time of your unraveling mind. A light breeze floats through a crack in the wall, carrying the faint scent of lavender from a nearby garden, an unlikely perfume that settles your nerves like a lullaby. You press your palm to your forehead, tasting dryness and promise. Maybe you can hold on, perhaps just long enough to see dawn. Historians still argue whether sleep deprivation was used as torture or simply a side effect of medieval watches. But either way, you're experiencing it firsthand. Your mind quiets as you realize the devilish art of assassination demands mental fortitude above all else. If you can't trust your senses, every shadow becomes an adversary, every whisper a conspiracy. You massage your temples, tasting the tang of madness receding, providing yourself with a mental anchor, recalling the superstition about ivy leaf protection. You rub the leaf against your heart, whispering, "Be still." Several heartbeats pass, and you feel furnace-warm determination rekindle. You gather your dagger and edge toward a back door marked storeroom exit. Your pulse steadies, the world sharpens. You're not just a blade in the dark. You're a mind that can override panic, a spirit that can outlast fear. Stepping outside, you adjust your grip on your dagger, feeling its reassuring weight. The alley is quieter now, shadows receding as if acknowledging your regained composure. You take a deep breath, tasting the night's cold air and the first hints of resolve. Because in this deadly game, the mind can be the deadliest weapon if you dare to wield it. And you, battered but unbroken, are ready to prove it for another heartbeat. And maybe another day. You step into the moonlit square where torches cast dancing shadows against timber-framed buildings and immediately feel the pull of a grim audience. Tonight's entertainment, public justice, dispensed with a fatal finality. You probably won't stick around for the curtain call. In medieval England, public executions drew crowds of up to 10,000 spectators, peasants, merchants, even noble observers all clamoring for a glimpse of law in action, mainstream fact. You, however, are neither judge nor jury, just a reluctant spectator, hoping the next stage doesn't include you. The crisp night air carries the sour tang of spilled ale mixed with the coppery hint of fresh blood. Your stomach, still echoing Section 8's growls, lurches at the thought of trading starvation for witness to someone else's demise. You skirt the edge's boots, clinking softly on cobblestones, and the creak echoes like guilty cough, recalling Section 3's rattling armor that never quite lets you blend in. Call it an assassin's curse. At the square's center stands a wooden scaffold blackened with age and streaked with rusted iron. A stout gallows frame looms overhead, noose swaying gently in the breeze like a pendulum counting down seconds. To one side, a block with iron restraints awaits its next guest. You swallow hard, tasting the tang of fear in your mouth. Fringe whispers claim some executioners polished their axes with sheep's fat to ensure a clean cut, believing it spared the condemned extra suffering. You shudder. No amount of sheep lotion could comfort you now. Historians still argue whether such practices actually improved execution efficacy or were merely grim superstitions. Drums roll from a nearby watchtower signaling the condemned's arrival. Leather boots crunch on gravel, and you see the prisoner trudging forward, hooded and shivering. His wrists are shackled, his clothing threadbare, and a rope bites into his neck like an unwelcome collar. He glances toward you, eyes wide with regret, and you wonder if you'll wear that same expression come dawn. A light joke rises. At least you're not on the dock yet. You immediately chastise yourself. Gallows humor doesn't bode well when the scaffold is your potential destination. A herald steps onto a raised platform, unfurling a parchment proclamation. His voice booms, magnified by the square's acoustics. John of Lancaster, for theft, treason, and consorting with wolves, you are hereby condemned. Wolves' curious detail. In some border regions, accused traders were rumored to have pacts with actual wolves that prowled the moors. Fringe narratives said wolves would howl with delight at an execution, but urban legends aside, you focus on the author's flourish rather than the facts. The prisoner kneels at the block, his hands clasped in prayer. The executioner, face hidden beneath a leather hood, hefts a two-handed axe nearly as tall as you. You can almost feel the weight of history in that blade, the same tool that severed kings' heads in later centuries, though here it serves local justice. Historians still argue whether the notoriety of executioners made them respected agents of order or pariahs, ostracized even by criminals. Either way, that hooded figure holds absolute power over life and death right before your eyes. Crowds press closer, torches flare, illuminating a sea of faces as some grim, some curious others, whispering wagers on whether the swing will be swift or clumsy. A pungent whiff of sweat rises from the packed throng, competing with the fetid aroma of stagnant puddles in a gutter nearby. You wrinkle your nose, no modern sanitation here, then remind yourself that the scaffold is an equalizer. Everyone smells equally awful in the shadow of mortality. The executioner lifts the axe-high metal, gleaming coldly. You hear the faintest collective intake of breath from the crowd. In that suspended moment, you realize just how tight the audience's grip is on this ugly ritual, a shared secret that crime will be punished. A sudden gust sends flickering sparks from a brazier into the night. You flinch, thinking the gods might be smiting the sinner, but it's just poor placement of burning coal, not divine intervention. The axe descends. The sharp crack echoes like thunder, and for a heartbeat, everything goes silent. Then a collective gasp erupts. The severed head tumbles into a wicker basket. The body's shoulders slump forward. The executioner wipes his blade on a rag, staining it dark. You shut your eyes. Picturing that swing rewound, would you find the nerve to pull the cord on your own assassination? A guard steps forward and hoists the basketed head onto a spike. Atop the north gate, a grim trophy warning of justice's reach. You recall Section 9's tavern gossip rumors of that same practice sparking fear among potential thieves. The spike gleams under torchlight head, swiveling to swell the horror. A light joke struggles free talk about a head-turner. You bite your lip. Levity here feels sacrilegious. Nearby, a vendor hawks skewered meat, hawking fresh-grilled mutton free with admission, though the meat's dubious hygiene might kill you faster than the gallows. A child tugs his mother's sleeve, eyes wide, whispering, "Will the next show be different?" The mother shushes him, but you sense the boy's fascination, a curiosity you share, though it curdles your blood. Once the crowd's attention shifts momentarily to the vendor's pitch, you slip away, pressing into a narrow alley. The square's din fades behind you, replaced by the drip of a leaky gutter and the creak of loose shutters. You lean against cold stone heart, pounding in your ears. Public executions were meant to deter crime, but you wonder if they did more to desensitize the populace to violence. Historians still argue whether these spectacles upheld moral order or simply fostered cruelty. Your sleeves drip with moisture, doubt, and maybe leftover soot from the brazier's smoke. The execution's finality feels less like justice and more like a warning, directly aimed at faceless shadows like you. If you survive another day, you'll carry this scene in your mind like a talisman of terror. If you falter, it'll be the last thing you remember. You slip your dagger free, its edge still sharp, despite muffled clatters in Section 3's armor. You wipe it on your cloak, no sheep fat required, and tuck it back into place. Your boots scuff the alley stones as you forge on the echo of that axe swing, trailing like a ghost. In medieval times, once someone witnessed a beheading, they never forgot the sound, sight, or smell, and neither will you. If surviving this week as an assassin means internalizing every lesson, remember, this public justice is a spectacle of horror, not a quick curtain call. Lasting a week means outlasting the crowd's appetite for blood, and that, my friend, might be the cruelest trial of all. You emerge into the cool hush before dawn, every bone weary and every nerve singing its own warning song as the first pale light spills across the rooftops and finds you still breathing. Your chest heaves, lungs feeling like bellows, squeezed too tightly, and you realize that exhaustion cut deeper than any blade ever could. In 15th century towns, watchmen's shifts began at cockcrow around 4 a.m. and extended until sunrise to deter nocturnal crimes, meaning the hour you face now is the cruelest of all mainstream fact. Each step takes you past shuttered windows and silent courtyards where shadows pool like falling ink, and you recall every rattling hinge, every goat's bleat, every squeal of metal that turned your stealth into spectacle. Your legs tremble, half made of lead and half guided by adrenaline. You remember that cramped chapel tunnel from Section 12 and the goat sentinel from Section 4. And you wonder if the same creatures who once betrayed you now slumber off duty, despite the cold sweat beads at your hairline mingling with dawn's mist as you navigate a narrow lane. The air smells of damp stone and faint wood smoke, echoes of fires banked against the night's chill. A fringe anecdote drifts through your mind. Some secretive bands of assassins were rumored to coat their footsteps in crushed lilac petals to mask their scent, believing their floral disguise was undetectable by hounds or guards alike quirky. You press a shaking hand to your mouth to stifle a cough, but each breath rattles like ancient armor. Ahead, a lone lantern flickers at a crossroads. Behind it lies the city gate, your last hope for escape. Beside it stands the scaffold used for public executions, a grim reminder of those who failed before you. You pause, tasting copper on your tongue, and fight the tremor in your fingers. Each heartbeat feels as loud as the town crier's bell. Historians still argue whether dawn patrols relied more on sharp eyes or impromptu alarms sounded by tavern keepers. But you know it was likely a ruthless blend of both scholarly debate. You sprint the final stretch boots, slipping on dew-slick cobbles, each footfall a protest against your failing strength. The gate's iron bars gleam in the dawn light, but the portcullis is already halfway lifted, creaking high above. Two groggy guards rub their eyes, leaning on halberds' heads, nodding in exhaustion. They see you burst through with ragged gasps, cloak-torn face, smeared with grime and dried blood. You lurch forward, stumbling past them as if driven by a dream, not by fear, and one bellows, "Stop!" But the words trail off as you crash through the half-open gate into the chill of the morning fields. Behind you, shouts ricochet off stone walls, growing distant as you race under a sky brushed with violet and gold. Each breath slips through your throat like fragile glass. You press on, lungs burning, and dare not glance back. The city's silhouette fades into mist, replaced by open meadows, dotted with silver dew. You think of home of soft beds and warm hearths, and imagine the world beyond these walls. Your limbs tremble, vision blurs at the edges, and you realize that surviving a week as a medieval assassin wasn't about perfect stealth or lethal precision. It was about enduring every test the night could throw at you and living to see another sunrise. You stagger onward until your knees give out, collapsing into damp grass as the gate's iron click echoes behind you. You lie there, gasping, body aching in every joint, and understand that while you may have outrun the town's defenses, you cannot outrun the ache of every memory stitched into your flesh. And yet, your eyes close with the world's first light shining softly upon you, and in that fragile moment, you know you have survived the night. Your heart finds a softer rhythm as the first pale light of dawn touches empty streets, and the clamorous night recedes like the tide, leaving only gentle echoes of memory. Every sensation slows further, each breath drawn with newfound calm, while the chill morning air drapes you in quiet reassurance, and the world around you feels both familiar and serene. Shadows fade gently into soft golden hues, and sleepy birds begin to trill their morning songs, weaving delicate melodies that coax your weary spirit toward peaceful awakening and gentle reflection. Hushed thoughts settle fine dust upon calm waters, allowing every anxious memory to drift away, and you sense the tension in your shoulders softly, gently melt in the warming light. Your eyelids grow heavy as the rhythm of your breath becomes a lullaby, and every edge of your mind unravels into a haze where only tranquility remains, inviting sleep's embrace. The world's hurried clamors fade to a distant murmur, and your senses unfurl like petals at dawn, welcoming the gentle twilight between consciousness and dreams, where you can finally rest. Let the weight of the past slip away with each exhale as you surrender to darkness, trusting that the night's lessons will settle beneath your heart, guiding you through slumber. May each fading heartbeat be your final whisper before dreams carry you on wings toward a realm where fear gives way to peace and your soul finds rest beyond world stir. Let gentle waves of calm wash over your mind, releasing every shadow that lingered in the night, so that you drift effortlessly into dreams adorned with light and quiet hope. Tomorrow's challenges can wait behind yesterday's closing eyelids, granting your spirit a tender, soft refuge where warmth replaces worry and tranquility becomes your only companion as twilight yields to dawn. Rest now in the hush between heartbeats and know that each breath carries you deeper into slumber, where tomorrow's dawn finds you renewed at peace and ready to awaken anew. End of script. Sweet dreams.